Welcome to T-Smack, home of the T-Smack. May I take your order?
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, and comics. I'm your host, Josh Scar, and as far as the Smackheads go, I am flying solo, but I have a very cool guest with me this week. I have one award-winning director. Would that be accurate to say? Award-winning director, filmmaker?
Short film. I've won awards on my short films. I'm a cinematographer, in the digital realm, pre-vis artist, animation. Yeah, my name is Gary H. Lee. I am, I was the head of pre-vis on Netflix Magician's Elephant, and I'm currently the head of cinematography at Sony Picture Animation.
And we are here to talk about Gary H. Lee. So what a coincidence that you are here. And we are very happy to have you.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to have someone with like your prestige on here. I don't know if you would necessarily call it prestige yourself, but some of the projects you've worked on are very impressive, especially from like your first project, which we'll get into a little bit here. But it's very cool to have you here, and we appreciate your time. We usually save this for the end of the podcast, but because you're acting as co-host as well as interview subject, we have a semi-famous segment called "What You Doing," where we just talk about the fun stuff we're doing away from work and just things we're doing to make life a little more palatable. So, like one of our other co-host Matt, he watches a bunch of Star Trek. I obviously watch a lot of like Marvel movies and read comics and play video games. Most of us do some sort of thing like that. So Gary H. Lee, what you doing?
I am learning Unreal Engine at the moment.
Ooh.
It's a game engine that it's relatively complex, but it's kind of the future, in my opinion. It's like a real-time game engine that deals with physical light in that calculates like just millions of geometry. It's super nerdy, but it's coming from a place that the industry is kind of going that way. So I'm taking the opportunity to learn it. Aside from that, so I'm trying to do it in a way that is almost like a video game for myself, doing as gameplay, even though I'm learning something, rather than actually spending the time to like play a video game. So it's like, why instead of playing a video game, why not learn the game engine and then pick up a skill while you're spending that kind of hour doing something. Aside from that, watching Last of Us, but
Yes.
very far behind to the general public, and I try to dodge all the spoilers on all my social media when I scroll through my phones. And it's really hard. It's like it's really hard these days to, I'm only 3 episodes in.
Ooh, episode 3 is like so good. That's the Bill and Frank episode.
That's right. That
Yes.
one's my favorite so far. It's just
Oh
so
yeah.
unique that, and I got super emotional watching it towards the end.
Yep.
And I'm like, I could just totally watch this. I don't need to see the, crazy zombie slash clickers part of it. Yeah, that's we have two little ones, one 6-year-old, a year and a half, the other one's a year and a half. So having two kids give us a little bit less time to watch TV. So we're just occasionally we'll do 1 hour here, 1 hour there, and so far that's what we're on.
Otherwise, it's lots of Bluey and Paw Patrol.
There's a part of me that thinks that Bluey is probably like running the economy of Australia at the moment. It really is such a charming show. I actually love it. My wife, it's actually my wife's favorite show, like
Yes.
literally. And yeah, no, I it's one of those shows that I have no problem. My daughter binge watch it and watch it again and again. It just is really sweet. All of that. Yeah, I literally I think there's no one I know who has kids that's not in the whole Bluey wagon.
Yeah, Bluey's a really interesting phenomenon because I would never thought 20 years ago before I had kids that I'd be so obsessed with a show that is geared towards technically all ages, but mainly towards kids ages like 4 to 8, maybe 4 to 10. But I mean, like you said, it's so charming, and I'm pretty sure my household alone has paid for like at least at least 1 month's of Ludo Studios rent because we have so many Bluey toys that my wife and I just we see them at the retail store and we're just like they need it, not us. We don't need it. They need it.
Oh, you're right about that. Like there are shows where my daughter will watch it, be like trying to stop her from watching it. There's a lot of cartoons where I feel really I will try to like distract her to get her away from it and be like, oh my god, this is like this is not sophisticated information. I don't want her to take. Bluey is not one of them. Bluey is if she wants to watch it, I'm always like, okay, just put it on, and that feels good as a parent.
Yep.
I because you always try to like kind of manage what your kids take in. I'm sure you feel the same way.
And that's actually a weird dichotomy, actually, thinking about it with Bluey. And we will get into your resume and everything as well here in a moment. But one weird thing with Bluey is that it doesn't feel like it is in it for the merchandising. Like merchandising is obviously a big part of a lot of animated series, but it never feels like they're putting something into the show to be like this is going to be a toy.
That's,
Unlike anything in Paw Patrol or any virtually any other kids show, like it never feels like they're creating something just to merchandise it.
I couldn't agree more. There's a show that um, my daughter has been watching lately called Crybabies. I don't know if it's on your radar at
I
all.
have seen a little bit of it, but it's one of those shows that I think I hear it and I'm just like I don't even want to know if they're enjoying it. They can enjoy it, but that is the limit.
Yeah, it's a show that really is built for merchandise, and there's just a part of it that feels a little. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure the intention of the creator is a positive place or not. I don't know. I can't. Don't quote me on it. But yeah, definitely there are content that just feels a little bit gross, in the sense that it's beautifully eye candy, render super poppy colors that is just catching little kids' attention, and then but then the substance are relatively non-existent. Yeah, again, Bluey. Everyone should go watch it.
Yes, Bluey is an end all be all for great animated series. It's like Batman the animated series and Bluey right there. I, so Gary, we are here to talk about you though. We're not here to just gush about Bluey and how wonderful it is. And you have a history with animation and visual effects. So give us a little bit about your origin story into the industry of pre-vis and animation.
So I mean, yeah, I can give a cliff note version of that. I came here when I was 13 years old. I didn't speak English at the time, and first coming here, didn't have a lot of friends. I think I was kind of buried in comic books, and that's kind of like my parents start buying, allowing me to read a ton of comic novels. Where when I was in Taiwan, that was something that was my dad was not super excited to like kind of feed me comic books, just like the stuff that we were talking about a second ago with certain shows and feeling like, yeah, you should study and do all that. But I think it's to kind of feel that comfort for when I first came to the States. And so I used to be reading a ton of comic books. I have to say a lot of it is Japanese comic books, kind of manga style, because I was to be honest, like when I was in Taiwan, I really didn't have a lot of access to the Marvel, the American comic books. And what was really funny at the time is I would read the American comic books and be like, wow, everything is so slow. It just like poses. Whereas, the manga has speed lines, has like big, annotations. And anyway, it was like I got really fascinated by different story that gets told through the genre of comic. And I even started drawing my comic books. I was illustration. At some point, my mom was at the time working for a computer store as an accountant, and she was able to get us. Uh, I got my first computer, and someone loaded a pirated version of 3D Studio Max, which is a 3D software. And from that point on, I think that was also during the time that Jurassic Park came out, and it was that was really the film that made me want to be in the movie industry. Just the make believe aspect of what was on the screen blew my mind, and of course the whole Star Wars history, visual effects, all of that. So I think very quickly with the 3D animated software, I was able to make a ship fly or a sphere kind of go. Toy Story was out at the time, and I think I shifted my passion from comic books, illustrations, over to kind of motion art and cinema right around when I was probably 17, 18 years old. So I actually made my first animated short film when I was in Upland High School before graduation. And then I went to Art Center Pasadena as the illustration major. At the time, Art Center didn't really have a animation department. It was very early, there was not much. Like I would sit in to senior classes because there was a few animation classes that are in the 3D realm, and using those classes, I learned about you know a bunch of my senior graduating friends are about to graduate. They're about to apply for jobs, and one of the professor was like, "Hey, in Star Wars, I have a friend at Skywalker Ranch. They're looking for a pre-vis animatic artist." And at the time, I was like, "Oh my god! All these senior students, they get to apply. They're graduating. It's super cool." And I think it was like during those few weeks when everyone was applying, suddenly one night, I kind of woke up and go, "Hey, I had this like short film I did in high school. Can I think I'm just gonna take that and try to, see if I just apply with everybody, see what happens." And it's really from that I think the animation had what the animatic team at Lucasfilm at the time needed, and that was actually what got me the job at Lucasfilm. And I was very lucky. It was a kind of one of those right place to right time scenario. I happen to know 3D animation during that time that there wasn't a lot of people that knew it, and it was just a niche I was hired. I was 19 years old, and that's the beginning of my journey at Lucasfilm Star Wars. And really, it was there that I meet a bunch of probably the most talented people I know still today. I'm talking about concept artists, designers like Ryan Church, like Eric Temin, like Doug Chang. I met Doug Chang, who was art director on Star Wars Episode One. And also within that group, it was really all my peers were kind of the first. I was is I think you will be too cocky to say that is the first group of kind of like the pre-vis people that end up building out kind of uh, the industry of pre-vis in Hollywood today. But they really became that way. I have my peers would go and start previous companies such as Third Floor, which is the biggest previous company today that did all the Marvel films, and Halo Entertainment, which is a huge previous company that does, Life of Pi and, um, you know, DC, all sorts of visual effects driven films. Um, it was happened to be the right place, the right time to be with a group of people that end up now becoming kind of the people who are setting the standard of previous in the industry today. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling, but
Oh no, this is all just super interesting, and like the fact that you just happen to fall into not necessarily fall into, but you created something that got you a job to work on a Star Wars film as your first job in the industry is just so cool. And like, have people say what they will about Attack of the Clones, but like for you as a person who worked on that film, I'm sure that's just like the coolest film ever, because that's literally where you what is it, cut your teeth or whatever the turn of phrase is. uh but like it's just such a cool concept. Like I could never imagine just being like, oh, I talk somewhat for a living, like let me just go submit my resume to NPR, and then like, oh hey, yeah, you get a job, you can be a host on our airwaves. Like what? No. I could never imagine just falling into something like Skywalker Ranch.
I mean,
Just being like, shoot, I mean, shoot your shot, yeah.
it truly felt like, in a lot of ways, winning a lottery for that very little, kind of the universe of a boy who grew up watching Star Wars, being a fan, and able to make the leap and actually be at the ranch, at the main house where, George Lucas works, and to be part of that. And that is really special. But I will have to say, don't shortchange what you just said, because when I was there, it would, the people that were also hired within that group are a bunch of young people from different parts of the US that are really either in animation school or in art school, or just trying things and being excited about visual effects, being excited about visual storytelling through animation. And none of it had like a track record really, because the industry really hasn't even formed, in order to have like a career path to get there. And it was really after Lucasfilm, I moved back to LA. I went to DreamWorks Animation. That even when I was at DreamWorks Animation, they had just started. I got to participate in their first 3D animated film, and prior to that point, they were all doing 2D animated films, such as like Sinbad. Uh, what is it?
Didn't they do Prince of Egypt and
Prince of Egypt, Sinbad, films as such, and that was
uh El Dorado? Was that another one of theirs?
yes, yes. And those were before my DreamWorks time, and that's why it's a little bit hard to recollect. But the industry was pivoting because of the Pixar wave of the Toy Story, of the Bugs Life, and all of that. And DreamWorks had done their first ants from like their Northern California studio PDI, and now the LA studio is making their first 3D animated film, which is Over the Hedge. And even at that time, I would go into the studio and be hired as a layout artist in animation world that's called layout, because traditionally all the layout were done in 2D. So they were almost like laying out a shot. And so they were still calling digital artists like layout artists. And most of my peers were much older than me. They were people that's been in the industry for decades. And I was a very young kid. And the reason why I was able to be there, just because I knew this new way of, helping to visualize a film, that many people that had to learn from the ground up, relearn. So they had to abandon their 2D skills and then now go and learn a 3D software in order to do that job. It was a really interesting transition, and I felt like I just kind of fell into that at that time.
And I think you raise a really great point that can transition us into a little bit of why you're here today, which is you are the cinematographer for the upcoming net. Well, by the time this episode comes out, it should have come out by now. The Magician's
Oh,
Elephant. I keep wanting to say the Magician's Nephew because Narnia books, but it's the Magician's Elephant. And I even wrote it in my notes, the Magician's Nephew. Jesus. The Magician's Elephant, which is a new animated feature coming to Netflix, which I think Netflix has had a really good run of animated features. And so I'm really excited to see what this one is, especially now getting to talk to someone involved with the film. So I would ask, how does finding cinematography and animation differ from what would happen in live action?
they have becoming closer and closer in the essence of the work. I think um, for the longest time as a previous artist, or now I've got a title of in kind of the cinematography, digital cinematography, is because the industry is heading that way. But prior to this point, it is actually hard for me to tell people what I do. I tell people I'm a previous artist, a layout artist, an animatic artist, all of which are essentially the same thing. It's just they're being called differently under different context. In animation world, a lot of it is layout. In live action, previous world is pre-visualization. And
And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it also different stages in the production process? So like layout would maybe be like step one, whereas animatic might be step two and three.
actually, no, they all kind of begin to blur.
No?
Yes, I would say it's interesting now. Previs seems to be the first stage, and then for animation films they will have they could have a previs stage, and then it will go into layout stage, which previs is more exploratory. You're looking at what's on the script, what came out of the story reel, um, and then once you get your 3D characters, once you get your 3D sets, you're starting to scout in that space with a camera that's like a virtual camera, and you're finding opportunities, a, a visual language to tell that story. And sometimes as you're kind of molding how you want to tell that story, it gets more and more refined, and you start producing shots that goes into, it's like, okay, now we kind of know what we can do in this space, now let's shoot this sequence. And then the actual shooting of the sequence process lands into kind of the layout process, which oftentimes these days it goes into your animation studio, or in under the context of Magician's Elephant, we have a partner studio in Australia called Animalogic, which they've done a lot of work. Lego Movie, Peter Rabbit, etc. And they were the kind of our vendor partner studio that took on kind of the back end of the production for Magician's Elephant, in which so I had a team in LA, a very small team of previous members. That's Morgan Kelly, Brian Magner, Don Rich are the three previous artists I have here in LA that we shot about 30% of the film, while the rest was shot actually in Australia with Animalogic, with an entirely different team under Ned Walker and Fabian Mueller. And my job become someone who kind of oversees the whole process to make sure that the execution is is at quality and is serving the intention of kind of the visual language we want to have for the picture. Um, Josh, I have to confess that it's really going from production to production, that there is a different production workflow, that they decide how they want to utilize previs, how they want to utilize layout, how much duration of that production lives in which stage, and it's quite organic these days. Right now I'm at Sony Picture Animation on a new film called K-pop Demon Hunter, and that film itself is gonna try to do previs in a very different way. So the more and more I begin to tell people, I said, I will share that, my job is there to kind of help the director to visually tell that story, and 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 then within that, to kind of come up with a plan of how we want to shoot this film. And I think with all those responsibilities, then then the industry starts to recognize it as, oh, then it's a digital cinematography.
When we were speaking, or was it Catherine was the one who connected us? Um, I'm spacing on her name. Um, when she gave me kind of like your bio and everything, she talked about how you use a digital camera that stimulates existing physical area to kind of create a sense of space for your shots and for your set pieces in the animation. Can you talk about that process of how you use the digital camera?
Sure, sure. I think because the sophistication of technology today, you can really actually model a digital camera to a actual physical camera. That's today a film camera, whether it's coming from Red, RE, 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter. You can actually dial in a digital camera that replicates what you see out of the field of view, out of like a real physical camera. So a lot of times, um, when I am in the having the responsibility to be the head of previs or head of cinematography for a show, it's always about serving the story. So we'll look at the character, the opportunities of that story, and trying to deconstruct it, and to think about what is the best camera that we want to use to shoot it. Whether it's the different aspect ratio, 16:9, 2:3:9. Do we want a widescreen, cinema scope, and um, and on top of that, to for the example of Magician's Elephant, there will be languages of the characters that are kind of opposing to each other, such as in Magician's Elephant, it was Peter and Velna. So when we're in their bedroom, or when we're in their apartment, we would shoot them in kind of a opposing composition with a background that feels pretty flat, that doesn't have a lot of dynamic perspective, that really kind of gave it like that restricted feel, versus another set of character that you want to feel the warmth, that we would stage the camera and shoot them more dynamically. Camera's not going to be so formal. There's going to be more perspective lines in the background. We'll be shooting with over the shoulder of the character, instead of they're just like clean single when you're doing the close-ups. Um, it's all those small choices that end up making some sort of like this camera bible that you kind of establish, and that becomes information that you can share with the entire team. So no matter which artist that is doing a certain shot, they understand that there's an intention behind it, and trying to go there, instead of just looking at a shot from a compositional standpoint and going, hey, I'm just going to try to frame every shot as like the most dynamic, most beautiful shot possible. Um, which, sometimes I feel like watching a film like Michael Bay's film, you get every single shot is so dynamic. Every single shot is so,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much going on. I always have to, and by the way, Michael Bay came from Art Center, which is a school that I went to too. And I always feel that if you take any of his shots out of context, you'll be like, wow, that's a really well executed shot. And I have to applaud him for it. But the thing is that sometimes when you cut 10 of those together, you don't know which one you're supposed to pay attention to, because they're all just as strong. Where, like in the film, I think you have to respect the highs and lows. You have to give certain shots, they're not to make it boring, but they're there to serve a purpose. So when a different moment that you're supposed to have, a huge emotion, um, that certain camera move actually stands out and resonate with you emotionally. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yes, we have a lot of latitude to replicate like a physical camera in the animation world. And for Magician's Elephant, the director Wendy Rogers really wanted a live action sensibility of our camera. So it also speaks to we don't have a lot of helicopter shots. A lot of cameras are moving in a way that is realistic, possible for a human being to operate that camera. Right? It's not something that is like carried by a drone, where you see in a lot of shows these days. That I think it's really cool. If there's an intention behind it that makes it work, but in terms of Magician's Elephant, it's really trying to give that grounded look um, to the film.
I think you can really see that having watched the trailer a couple times now. You can kind of get that sense that there is this sense of groundedness to the movie because, among other things, the elephant does look almost photorealistic. Like there's little animation exaggerations that you will see in most animated features, but like it's the characters around the elephant that are more exaggerated and animated, and the elephant is kind of like the central point. And therefore, it's kind of like the grounding wire for the eccentricities of everything around it.
No, I'm really happy. I'm glad that you feel that way. And speaking about the elephant, the T Rex or something like that is a good reference in the way that when we're first, looking at the magician elephant, we go, we want a frame for the humans in this world. So therefore, a lot of the elephant shots, we make sure that he's kind of bigger than our frame, right? He's kind of cropped, just like the illusion that you get, when you first watching in Jurassic Park, where the T Rex is always bigger than the frame. That really gave you the sense of the scale. I do feel that the later Jurassic Park, a lot of film, there's different approaches where sometimes you see a huge dinosaur, but it's perfectly framed within that within your frame, and somehow it's just not as impactful as something that you know seems a little bit cropped. So I just want to highlight that.
Sense of scale is something that's kind of lost its art, it seems, because like Gareth Edwards, another Star Wars guy, really has a great sense of scale. You look at his Godzilla
Oh my
movie, you
god,
look at
yes.
Rogue One. Anytime there's something massive, you get that sense of scale. And then if you go into any of the Godzilla sequels, especially like Godzilla versus Kong, like nothing feels like extraordinary. Like it's all just there's a couple shots for scale, but mostly they seem more like for 3D audiences. Because like I remember in there's a couple shots where like the sci-fi vehicle like flies through Godzilla's mouth or next to Godzilla, and you're like, oh dang, they're huge. But it really seems more almost like Iron Man flying through New York in the Avengers than it really does like a moment where you really get the sense of scale
Yeah,
of what's happening and what's going on around them.
no, that's you're totally spot on. I think something as just even how you compose that shot, like what the sizing of a character, the sizing of the creature, the sizing of that giant Pacific Rim, whatever. Small things like that really speaks to how a viewer takes in that experience, and we pay a lot of attention to things like that. Something that my job is. Yes, I pay a lot of attention to. Oh, even the height of your camera, like how whether you're shooting a person on the camera height is at the shoulder or to their face or the waist, all those things changes how you feel how big that person is, right? Like you want to shoot someone heroic, you put the camera a little bit lower so you feel like you're looking up at him and the horizon is much lower. All those things are tricks that we are just trained to um, view from like over a century of cinematic experience. It's like it's wired in us to kind of feel a certain way when we watch it. All of that is a language that is quite subliminal, but it's there for sure.
So one thing you mentioned a little bit earlier, you talked about how each project in each studio is kind of different yet organic. Is that because of like software that's available? Because I know like Disney is really proud of their water software where it's like almost photorealistic at this point. But then you also have Sony Animation who now has this license on the frame rate kind of animation that they did with Spider Verse that we're seeing getting mimicked in stuff like the new Ninja Turtles movie. Puss in Boots utilized it a lot in DreamWorks with their action sequences. So is it more technology based as to why these productions are just so different, or is it like you said, where it's still just kind of a growing industry where people don't necessarily have a blueprint as to how each production should be done, kind of like how Marvel has their blueprint of like, okay, you guys just shoot the shots and we'll do all the visual work, you don't worry about the action sequences because we've got that handled.
My existence in the past 20 years of being in the industry, there is some of that in the sense of, when first, you know like A Bug's Life versus Ants, or perhaps like Shark Tale versus Finding Nemo, or it's like somehow the technology is like, oh, hey, we can make fur for the first time. Now, like our next film, there's going to be furry characters, right? We can do this. And then, like, technology is kind of helping to drive the type of stories studio wants to tell for a moment, I think, in the earlier stages of my involvement in the industry. But I think it today is gotten to a point where you can kind of do anything you want through technology. Then it really becomes an artistic choice from the creators, the directors that are driving that particular vision. I think, my understanding of Spider Verse, there was so much experimentation that goes into the look of the film, right? Like what kind of filter we want, what kind of what is their version of out of focus, right? It has that comic book, kind of moraying effect, and those are the things that now with technology you can do, and it becomes just is a matter of choice and subjective choices from the filmmaker. I do think that even on the film I'm on right now, without speaking too much about it because we're quite early, I almost feel that there is a conversation about what is the style, right? What is the style of that movie? And then so a lot of it is like the collaboration between the production studio that can actually execute those shots, that can try different effects. Like I think something like Spider Verse, something like Mitchell versus Machines. There's a lot of line work, that cartoony thing that is also embedded in like a physical 3D environment. That you're even the Ninja Turtle trailer, which looks super refreshing. Now it's like the you're no longer chasing the most realistic water anymore, right? Because that's been done and that's easy. Now it's like, how are we gonna do it in a way that is fresh, that feels like someone just scribbled? Like I was studying a few frames of Ninja Turtle. My friend Ken Seki, who's have cinematography on that picture, super nice guy, super talented, and I was studying a few frames from the trailer that their out of focus is almost like it just becomes a looser drawing.
You see that a lot in the cityscape
Yes.
where like some of the lines are, yeah, that I thought that was super
And
cool.
I love that my participation to that is actually separated from the stylization, which is how we want to compose, how we want to move the camera, why do we want to frame our characters a certain way, and then the stylization comes from the second step, which is the production designer and the creative team, and then the production studio that can continue to refine it into kind of like a stylized look. That's the partnership I'm seeing.
So you do have aspirations to become a director. Obviously, anyone in the industry would like to have more and more control over their artistic vision. Uh, you see a lot of cinematographers as well kind of go from cinematography to directors. How is that step usually taken? Or for you, how do you see that step going for you?
I think starting the industry at first, it started as a passion to try to tell story on a visual level, whether it's through comic books or through just having a few low geo 3D character that walks around and do a few things, and you make your short film that way. And at some point, you got a job, you're at a studio working, and for me, that becomes working in studio becomes my film school. That's where I'm like the sponge that just takes in. Okay, wow, on this production they're executing it this way. On that production they're shooting it this way. Something I learned from Kung Fu Panda is very different than something I learned from Life of Pi, working with Aang. Something that, and all of it becomes kind of master classes from one production to another. And oftentimes, for myself, I think I was one of those very naive filmmakers who just go, "Hey, I have a camera. I can go out and just shoot, my own project." And I had done a couple of short films, and on my Instagram, I recently just kind of posted my experience on shooting my third short film, Hector Corp, with my roommate at the time, who's a producer, like a commercial producer, and we just decided to shoot this short film at a soundstage in Hollywood. Getting together the money, shooting it, you realize, wow, you have to hire everyone, and you're paying everybody, which is what you're supposed to do. But film is expensive. It's almost like painting with the most expensive brush. Someone has used that analogy, and I think it's quite fitting. And and for that project, I was doing all the visual effects myself, and you realize, wow, it's a huge undertaking. And I think through these small projects, you learn filmmaking is a team effort, is a collaborative process, is something that you don't just do by yourself. Whereas perhaps a painter, a comic book artist, and not a different form of art, one could go and get your paintbrush and all that, and you can complete your painting as one individual. But when you're making a film, you have your actors, you have your crew, you need a space, you need a location. All of that, I guess where I'm going is that I've done a few different projects to really learn what it means to kind of make your own project, kind of a poor man's way of producing your own project. And I think the next step is to understand how to do that with the studio, with a bigger palette, to have that conversation, to have that partnership with the studio to do that. Because as a filmmaker, to do your own project, it can be a very challenging experience. I have done. I feel like I'm kind of going all over the place. You're asking a question that is good, is personal in the way that I'm also trying to understand what it means to take the next step, to be for the transition from a cinematographer to a director. And out of the experience of doing at this point 4 short films, one of which is called Aiden, that was actually a pitch to a feature film. It was like a short film concept. You got to learn how to pitch. You got to learn how to summarize your thing down to something that's very digestible for a studio exec, and something that's quite catchy, that they're willing to put the resources behind you to make that project happen. And I have to say, it really has to be a project that you're very, very passionate about, because as a director at a studio, there's definitely a lot of pressure when there's a lot of resources being put in the project.
Following up on that, though, I do have a couple questions that popped into my head, because one of the things I did want to bring up is animation as an art form, as serious cinematic filmmaking, storytelling, not just, oh, it's animation, it's for kids. um I don't believe that ethos is true. I think, especially like with the awards ceremonies, like they tend to lean more towards the all family, all ages friendly movies. And like, we've gone away from things like Cool World because they flopped so hard, because grown-ups back then didn't want to watch animation. But as a generation that grew up on a lot of animation, we had stuff like Batman the Animated Series. We had some like really compelling stuff in the mid 2000s with Avatar: The Last Airbender. We've had a lot of anime influences, a lot of manga influences come in that have really like legitimized animation as a storytelling platform. Attack on Titan is another really good example
Sure.
of depressing grown-up themes in an animated feature. Um, so how do you think the industry grows beyond just the current? Is it kid friendly for animation? Okay, but also I think kind of part two of the question is, I think animation does have a little bit more freedom than a lot of live action stuff does right now, because it feels like almost anything live action has to be tied into a franchise if it's going to get any kind of uh, green light after the pitch. So, could you talk a little bit about how you feel the industry could grow in animation, or is growing in animation, and how do you feel that is there more freedom in animation because there's not a push to tie it into a franchise at the moment?
Industry's view of animation is changing, and in a good way, definitely. I'm super fascinated by Netflix series, the Love, Death, and Robot, right? That is something that is just tailored for adults. And that was something that would have never happened because people just associate animation as kids friendly and something that is for kids. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, or the Car- Coraline. There's some animations that go to pretty moody, dark places where now that's no longer like shocking. I think that's a really really good direction that we're going as an industry. Now I understand why I was hesitant to talk about my own project for a second, because Aiden was a short film concept that I made that was a pitch to a feature film. It's a live action, and with live action film that's very kind of action driven sci-fi. And when trying to pitch that as a feature film, you very quickly realize now the live action film world are divided into, just as you said, you have your big blockbusters, and then you have your micro budget Blumhouse horror films, right? And a lot of the mid budget films, people are just not picking up. Or in addition to that, is the original content. Original content in live action is actually very hard, at least from my experience. Aiden ended up actually got, I win probably about 9 awards on that short film. And during the time right after the film festivals, it was actually picked up to turn into a feature. And I have financiers, that came in. Eventually, that didn't pan out due to the fact that our financier's previous film did not perform very well, and I think that was that contributed to us not able to make the film. So I think when you were asking me about the transition from cinematography to directing, a lot of times I think about that project, and there's a little bit of regret that comes from that. Um, so that was so. It was also interesting. Then your follow up question, talking about the differences of animation and live action. I do think animation people are taking more chances with. Um, I wouldn't say taking a lot of chances. I think the industry tends to want to play the safe bet, right? Like something that's based on a successful book, something that's based on a successful franchise, something that had a huge hit on the first one. Now let's start making the sequels. All the films, I was just looking at the most anticipated animated films of 2023. You have your Ninja Turtles, you have your Spider-Verse 2, you have your, like, going down the list is all sequels, is all existing franchise. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why Magician's Elephant is so refreshing, because Magician's Elephant is kind of original content, although it was still based on a children's book, right? So there is it's still kind of a content that derived from something. And I think my personal take as a filmmaker, as someone who is in this world of storytelling, I like to participate in original content because you get to kind of participate in setting up the palette, the the places to go, a language for that project. And once you kind of set that up, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be able to change later on. But you start to frame it for what that franchise will look like. Kung Fu Panda 1, 2, 3, Toy Story 1, 2, 3. None of them are like, whoa, Toy Story 2 looks totally different than Toy Story 1. That doesn't happen because you kind of know what that is. So I do think is animation and live action. First, to answer to your question, yes, I do think animation industry is changing. I do think animation is becoming more universal. Animation really got its own category on Oscar, doing like the Kassenberg times. That there's a push to go. We need a category that's animation, right? Um, but I do think that it needs to have. It needs to have. I would love to see that. There's any awards that's just like a Oscar for the animation industry that talk about best character animation, best layout, best etc. Um, I think for Oscar or for uh, I think eventually I'd like to see them just all become different mediums for stories rather than really having a huge distinction of this is a live action project, this is an animation project.
Yeah, and I mean with the special effects stuff going on with like Marvel with every release coming out, they get called out for more bad practices with how they treat their VFX departments and the people they license out to. It almost feels like with a lot of them, like you could have just made this an animated feature and the whole thing would look pretty seamless. People wouldn't be complaining about a floating head doesn't look great or a Modoc doesn't look great.
I remember,
But
sorry, I remember on Life of Pi, the visual effects company that made Life of Pi went bankrupt after making Life of Pi. And there's something to say about that industry when they can be doing so well on one area, but then as a business, it suffers so much. I do think the whole visual effects animation side of the entertainment industry does sometimes get a shorter end of the stick. Yeah, like I just so much of it, same thing as Avatar. I think a lot of it is, yes, there's character driven performances that are motion captured. There's also a ton of animators fixing everything afterwards. That I think all of it needs to be recognized and applaud because it takes a village to make a film.
so this is actually more of like a genuine personal question. Like maybe I'll even cut this from the episode. I'm not sure. With your pitch of Aiden, um, did you pitch that? You don't have to go like specifics, but did you pitch that to like a streamer or a full on like feature production studio? Because it seems like streamers are kind of where more, for lack of a better word, indie content can go and kind of thrive. Because like one of my favorite movies that came out, I believe during the pandemic or maybe it was just before the pandemic, was Over the Moon on Netflix, which is another
Sure,
Netflix original.
sure.
It didn't get a theatrical release, but like I said, Netflix has kind of been on a roll with some really good animated features. Apple TV Plus has had some really good animated features. So I'm just genuinely curious, like, is going to a streamer something you have considered for some of your projects, or did you actually do that?
For Aiden, I was fine. I was we had the funds to make the feature at one point. So for a few years, that was actually my full time job. That was also the time that Netflix was the only streamer. And when it didn't happen, I when I started family. I went back, not went back. I kind of started doing pre-vis again, and for a moment, it felt like I was trying so hard to do something that didn't happen. And but then very quickly realized, oh my God, how much I still love doing pre-vis, how much I still love being at that process of the filmmaking. So I think you know, since Aiden, I really haven't approached streamer or studios again because I was going from Vivo to Magician's Elephant and right now to Sony. That these are all really kind of exciting projects that was filling my artistic, muse. So I think my long and the short of it is yes, I am taking Aiden and other ideas out again. I really just haven't done it yet. And there's a part of me that does feel that today now is years after I had that experience. Now there is about 5 different streamers and there's so many places looking for content. I really need to just, go out there with my agent and have that conversation. A lot has happened doing all of this, and you have a way to get much out of me that I'm sharing, which is all good. Pandemic was a big thing that, you know, some production was shut down. It was a time that, everyone wasn't sure how to deal with it. And, I started a pandemic. I started Magician's Elephant at the first week of the lockdown. So during that time, I felt extremely safe to be working with Wendy Rogers, the director who I've known before. I've had, she was a visual effects producer on another project I was on. Julia Pister, a producer that many has praised before I come onto the project. It just felt like that was the place I wanted to be. And I wasn't pitching. I wasn't trying to direct or to do anything. That was that was an environment that I felt like this is what I want. Like I'm not thinking about anything else. I want to make sure that I'm just giving the most to Magician's Elephant. So I think at some point now, I end up making the whole film in my sweatpants, and Magician's Elephant was something that I end up having a really special experience out of due to many reasons, and it's also a beautiful film, something that we're all very proud of. I guess to your answer, I am gonna take, my projects out again in the after this project I'm on, and I am doing preparations for that. Yeah.
I wish you the best of luck. Have really enjoyed this talk, and I hope to be able to someday be like, I talked to that guy. I interviewed him on my podcast. You can go listen to it.
It's a whole different craft, like being on a project, executing a film versus selling a film, trying to pitch a film is two different skills.
Oh, I'm sure.
And definitely is something that I'm learning.
Especially to a room full of people that are simply sitting there listening to where's the money hook? Where's the money hook? Because they want that ROI. They want that return on investment.
There's definitely a lot of that for sure.
So I have one more question for you. We'll swing it back to the Magician's Elephant. The Magician's Elephant. I'm not going to say the nephew again. You are clearly a storyteller. You are someone that wants to tell stories. As a cinematographer, how do you scratch that storytelling itch? Is it in collaboration with the director to set up a shot, or is it more? Are you a little bit more independent in those sort of things?
Oh, it's always about collaborating with the director. It's always about speaking to different parts of that, different arms of that production, either with the collaboration with production designer, the editor. On Magician's Elephant, it was Max Boas, who was a production designer, and Yuri, who's an art director. You kind of want to help each other out in order to have the most kind of efficient way to work. And the thing about Wendy Rogers, who had a lot of visual effects producing experience, she knew exactly what pre-vis is. So it was a very easy experience to do on this film, because pre-vis, as you can tell by this point, before the word cinematography comes in, a lot of people don't know what it is. Like sometimes my parents, even for the longest time, didn't know what I do. They would think that I'm an animator, right? Uh, but in animation, there's 10 different professions, in within that. So I think what I find the satisfaction these days that I get is try to do try to plan and think smart for the production, for how you're going to help them to visually tell that story. And what does that mean? It means, um, I'll start scouting in very early stages, putting these video game like characters throughout every part of Botis, which is a town that we shoot in. And you, and then Wendy has this great idea of trying to build the entire town as one set piece. So you have your opera house, you have your theater, you have your opera house, you have your King's Palace, you have Peter and Belna's apartment, you have the bridge, you have the cathedral. All of that town is like put together under the kind of the description of how it was described in the original content, which is the book, right? And Max Boas with the production with the art team end up building something like that, and then I will have to go in there really quickly to start planting the camera and the characters in different parts of town to be like, oh, is the archway feel too big? Is the fountain feels too small for the elephant, or is too big for Peter? We start we want to have as many back and forth as possible, as quickly as possible, so you're not having to make those changes down the line where it becomes much more costly, right? And then also very quickly trying to provide some sort of visual language to go, okay, when we're in the palace, we want to try to shoot everything more centralized composition, something that's more formal. The king will give him like the bigger than the frame close-ups. For the countess, it will be something that's much more elegant, more reserved. And you start kind of documenting this visual, this camera guide, the deconstructing of that source material and then making them into visual pieces and able to communicate those visual pieces for the rest of the people who's going to execute all the shots and have all the execution to have intentions behind it, to me is extremely satisfying. So I get a lot of pleasure of storytelling coming from that these days. I think earlier years when I was an artist, sometimes you kind of focus on your portion of the shots that you're building, and you're not really thinking globally on as the entire film. And as the head of pre-vis, now you're thinking about the entire film from beginning to end as one single journey. To have that cohesive visual language, yet it's still different, for every character, for every relationship, for how you want to feel in certain environments. And if your viewers can respond to these things that you plant and have that emotion that you're trying to get out of them, be resonant, I actually think cinematography is probably one of the funnest job you can have. And the storytelling aspect of it, yes, is to help tell that story on a visual level. So I feel like I'm doing that on a daily basis. Um, on my own personal project, it's about writing script, writing story treatments, brainstorming, thinking about different ideas. And some of them you can execute yourself. Some of them are things that become pitches. And listening to, you know, audiobooks or reading different stories, getting you immerse yourself in storytelling. All of that, scratches the storytelling itch. So I feel very fulfilled, even though I am not in the director's seat at the moment. I don't know if that answers your very last question.
No, it definitely does. And Gary H. Lee, I appreciate so much your time, your answers. Very, very eloquent, very insightful. Would love to have you on again for future projects, or again if you just feel like talking nerd stuff. One question I did forget to ask you when we were doing the what you do and stuff is, what was your favorite manga or anime that you grew up on?
I really liked the very first one that got me into manga anime is definitely is Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball is
Of
is
course,
the easy
yes.
segue into it.
It's that era,
And I
yeah.
have to say, the later I get, I actually like for a while it was Naruto and actually Hunter x Hunter is the one that stuck with me for a long time. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or Hunter x Hunter. I don't know. I just feel like certain for a while there are comic books that it's like, oh my god, the drawing style is super cool. I really want to like draw like that. I want to learn the craft of doing that specific art. And I think as you get more mature, you care more about the story and the layers of that story and then the layers of that world. And it felt to me that Hunter x Hunter was something that I always just was blown away by different places that it's taking me. So is the admiration for Jurassic Park and Matrix and Star Wars, all those films. And later on, I become more really fascinated by like Stanley Kubrick, like The Shining, The Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket. Some of it, your taste, kind of evolves as you grow as an artist. And I don't know if that means more sophisticated or it just means that you have a different taste, all of which it is what it is.
Art is art, tastes change, all of it is acceptable. There's no right answer in art. So, Gary, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Would you mind giving out your social medias so people can kind of check out your stuff that you post?
Sure. I have my website is garyhlee.com and my Instagram is gary.h.lee. That's my Instagram. Is There's not a lot of stuff on there yet. I'm kind of feeling like I need to participate more in the social media land. We'll see how that goes.
That's a full-time job in itself. It's difficult, I tell you.
I really appreciate having me to just chat and talk, and there are parts of it I wasn't ready for, but I hope that was okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, it was great.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Gary. And thanks everyone for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh_Scar. You can follow the podcast at Talking Smack Pod. Please join our Discord. It's in the episode description as well as the link in our tweets and posts for this episode. You can email us your thoughts on anything in nerd culture, animation. If you liked what Gary had to say, or if you're an aspiring artist, let us know what you thought of Gary's story and what he's doing and how that might inspire you. Thanks to Kate Twilley. I looked you up. Kate Twilley is the one who connected us at 24PR. Thanks to Leo Allen for our musical themes, Beppo for our original avatars, Retro Ale Studios for our Ricky avatar. Please like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast on your podcatcher of choice, and most importantly, thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next week. Take care.
Watch Star Trek.
Who loves T-Smack?
I love T-Smack. Is it true? I do, ooh.